Joining us. This is the France 24 debate. Turkey erupts is our topic. With us from Istanbul, Suat KINIKLIOⴷLU, director of the Center for Strategic Communications, who, as he pointed out, no longer with the AK party. You were a member of parliament for a while, though. Thank you for being back with us here in the debate. Also with us, Dorothée, director of the Contemporary Turkey program at the French policy think tank IFRI. Evren, KÜÇÜKKAYA of the Observatory of Black, Gulf, and Mediterranean Seas, and a supporter of these protests that are taking place, as well as Benjamin Bruce, who's at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Benjamin Bruce, just before the break, was telling us how the issue of the alcohol is part of a steady drip of other issues that some have called it, I guess, a quiet change. Alcohol no longer served on most domestic flights. There you see the article in The Economist, Not So Good for You, that was recently published. Dorothée Schmidt, you say you were in Turkey last week, and you noticed that things were starting to get a little more tense than they were in the past.
Well, actually, the angle with which I was looking at Turkey was the regional tensions, because I was very focused on the Syrian crisis and the impact it may have on the internal governance in Turkey. So I maybe was a little sort of over-elected. But when I came to Istanbul, I was in the very east in Van, and when I came back to Istanbul, I found the city was crowded and that it was extremely strained. And I thought anything could happen in this city because there are too many people. And what you have to realize is that the riots and the reactions for the police took place in a very touristic neighborhood, and in also neighborhoods where many expatriates live. So Turkey's been really under the eyes of the world, and I don't think the government realized that at first when they launched the police and when the repression started, but then they got a very bad feedback in terms of image. And you also have to realize that most of the Arab medias immediately sent special envoys, and that it was massively covered in the Middle East.
And so that knocking a bit the prime minister's prestige. Nonetheless, Suat KINIKLIOДLU, when you see the reaction, we've seen reports of the shopkeepers in the center of town who've been helping the demonstrators. They're angry as well. What of Turkey's image? We see also the stock market today, which plummeted. What will it take now for the prime minister?
I think what needs to be addressed and I think recognized by your viewership is really that Turkey has a structural imbalance. We have a very strong ruling party, the government, with close to 50% in the last election. But no, you still have my title wrong, but no balancing political opposition, where many people, many of our citizens don't feel that their political interests and political views are being properly articulated. And that's a problem. I think one reason maybe why these protests erupted is because many citizens felt that their political views and ideas were not properly represented in the political arena. And it's been a surprise. Turks are not known to be protesting frequently or getting organized very effectively at all. And that's been the power of this protest movement, that people genuinely poured out and participated in these demonstrations. What does it take for the Prime Minister? I think the Prime Minister needs to understand that winning elections, even by a huge margin of 50%, doesn't mean that his will can be imposed on the rest of society. I think our democratic culture needs to mature enough to recognize that there are other, that citizens with other lifestyles needs to be respected, that especially in a charged environment and Kulturkampf environment in which we Turks live, that even the most constructive legislation that might be aimed at preventing very normal problems that societies have need to be taken very carefully, because there is a background to limiting people's lifestyles in this country. There is quite a bit of division. I mean, we are a very divided society in how we live, how much religion should play a role in our public life. And therefore, I think it's incumbent on governments, whoever runs Turkey, to be very careful and sensitive to the sensitive issues in our society. Alcohol is one of them, but it's not only that. I mean, there were other incidences where many secular Turks felt that their views or their sensitivities were not taken into consideration appropriately. I hope that these incidents will produce a new political environment where the government will be treating more carefully. And it's not only that. I think still, I insist that green and construction and life in urban cities has become extremely difficult. I think Dorothée SCHMID alluded to it. Our cities have become very crowded. Istanbul is probably close to 17, 18 million by now. And people want more green. The government has been engaging in a very aggressive, constructive boom through an agency that is supposed to provide cheap housing for our citizens, but it's become too much. I mean, Istanbul has 93 shopping malls. People do not want shopping malls anymore. But as I think the green, the construction issue, the difficulties of urban life allowed Turks of many walks of life to express a build-up that has been going on for many months that many of us, including the government, were not aware of.
All right, lots of building inside of Istanbul, where there's been a lot more people than there were in the past, coming like all the big cities in Turkey. Not just housing is projected, or shopping malls. There's also, for instance, and this has been a big talking point of late, the Shamlica Hill Mosque project, which has been described by critics as Erdogan's folly, a giant mosque overlooking Istanbul's highest point. And Benjamin Bruce, let me put to you the question that we put in part one to Suat, which is Erdogan, after 10 years in power, a little out of touch? Is that something that people want, a giant mosque overlooking the city?
With that question, perhaps. At the same time, it's always a question of out of touch with whom. Because we've already evoked a few times that the AKP has received almost 50% of the popular vote in Turkey. They have successfully dealt with many economic issues, and they have been addressing most particularly the question of Kurds in the southeast and negotiated the retreat of the PKK just recently. So these kinds of issues have been at the forefront, whereas at the same time, some of these questions involving the mosque are part of a larger debate, as mentioned already, a Kulturkampf that is going on in Turkey, the place of religion in Turkish society. And perhaps I find more interesting is to what extent it's been personalized. By Turkish law, it is impossible for the state to construct a mosque. It is not possible for the state to give even one penny, one kurush, one tiny little bit of money to the construction of a religious edifice. So to identify so personally all these events with Erdogan, and with him personally in the media recently saying, I'm going to get rid of the Ataturk Cultural Center, which is currently in Taksim, and replace that with a mosque. These are very interesting rhetorical devices, which I sometimes wonder to what extent he's using purposely to try to talk to a certain
And is he getting
populace.
traction when he says things like that?
Perhaps, but at the same time, I think the backlash that exists right now is even going beyond what he was expecting. He also has a certain fiery personality that has been very much used to his benefit in situations like we saw at the Davos conference, where he walked out of a meeting with the Israeli prime minister, I believe, or foreign minister, and many other situations where he uses that to his advantage, to be a man of the people who speaks his mind, who sold simit on the streets. It's a persona that he's used. We talked about the cult of persona that there was earlier. Now, to what extent that's out of touch right now, I think is a very good question, with him leaving the country to go to Morocco today and speak to the entire political group, elite of Morocco about democracy and its helpful benefits for economic advancement, the same way that Gül had done just 5 days earlier in Tunisia. I think the question of this presentation to the Arab world is also very important, and it's now more on his agenda.
Evren KÜÇÜKKAYA, should Erdogan have stayed in Turkey, or did he do the right thing continuing with his trip?
I think he should stay and try to find some way to create the dialogue between the protesters and the government. Protesters are revolting against what he did before, not only today. When the explosions happened in the Reyhanlı, unfortunately, he did the same thing and he left the country and he has gone to the United States. And people was very angry about that. Why didn't he in the Reyhanlı? And it's like I said, I'm not. I never support violence, but I am thinking one thing. They are always mentioning we came here with the vote of 50%, but they are forgetting one thing. There is another 50% in the country, not only the 50% that voted to them. And they are now, with this revolt, they are losing their 50%.
That's the one of the ways of seeing it. Erdogan, who, by the way, in the past has called his country's economic boom the Turkish Spring, this now denouncing comparisons between Tahrir and Taksim Square.
This comparison has been made by those who know nothing about the country. First of all, I wonder if the countries that went through the Arab Spring had the right to vote, if they had a multi-party system. Did they have it in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria?
Dorothée Schmidt, one analyst was quoted this morning as saying that is Turkey more democratic than it was 15 years ago? Yes. Is it more democratic than it was 5 years ago? That's debatable. Your thoughts on that?
That's the usual statement. But one thing I'd like to comment on is the economic growth and its social effects in Turkey. Because what I find fascinating is that now it's like you have the confrontation of two medium classes, like the old white Turkish classic bourgeoisie and the new Islamic one. And one of my friends in Turkey told me, now in this country, money rules and religion rules. And the problem, if you need to structure an opposition, is to find people who are not strictly coping with all this paying allegiance to this super capitalistic system that we're alluding to also when speaking about the constructions in Istanbul and the transformation of the city. And on the other side, the very conservative background that you have undoubtedly in the Turkish society. So, I mean, we're walking a very thin line. I mean, Erdogan has he's going to be elected doubtless next year because you cannot structure political forces that will challenge this vision for the future of Turkey.
Suat KINIKLIOⴷLU, it's doubtless that Erdogan will be elected president?
Well, a week ago I would have said yes, but it would be, there is too much time to see what will happen. There are so many unknown parameters. He's certainly the most likely next president of Turkey. However, I think what will be important to see his performance from now until next year. As you know, we will have local elections in March, and the local elections in Turkey pretty much give you a flavor of how things are going for all of the competing parties. I think it will be too early to say, but he's certainly the most likely candidate to win.
In the Financial Times, columnist Philip Stevens this Monday writes on how Turkey tried to look west when Erdogan came to power, but was, when rejected by the likes of Germany and France in its EU membership bid, instead opted to be a power broker. The strategy was overtaken by events. In the process, Turkey's begun to look more Islamist and less democratic. Turkey's not Egypt, nor Tunisia, Libya, or Syria. Erdogan's won 3 elections, and yet he seems to have failed to grasp that the essence of democracy is pluralism. Benjamin Bruce, what's going to be the upshot of the occupation of Taksim Square?
It's a very good question. I think this is one of those moments where it's very difficult for any one of us to see the direction that it's going in. When we were talking just before the program, the question of a general strike was something that was evoked. So to what extent...
Strikes are planned, by the way, for Tuesday and Wednesday.
And so the effects of these different movements, to what extent it does continue as well, I think more than anything what the response from the government will be very important, because the most rapid response that they have had at the moment has come from the president, has come from the interior minister, as well from the mayor of Istanbul, all of whom have basically said, we have gotten the message. Erdogan has continued with a form of more fiery rhetoric up until now. It's perhaps more in his camp right now to see to what extent this conflict will be continued, to also viewed to the extent that it's been personalized. How we see on the garbage barrels, his name has been written. So it's not necessarily 100% against the AKP, but more and more against this figure of Erdogan, who is becoming more and more imposing and imposing his will, firing journalists and basically controlling the expression of the people.
Just one point, during demonstrations, most of the slogans were just calling him to resign, and like 90% of the graffitis on the walls in Istanbul have Erdogan in a sentence, in an insulting way, so it's very personalized.
But is that something you'd expect from a secularist opposition anyway, or is it something new here?
I mean, it means that the mobilization goes beyond the classical secularist opposition, probably. It's not only about secularism, it's about also the personalization of power and the type of governance that Erdogan has imposed on Turkey.
All right, and it's in any case going to be a story that we will continue to follow here on France 24. Dorothée Schmid, I want to thank you. I want to thank Benjamin Bruce, Evren KÜÇÜKKAYA for being with us, and Suat KINIKLIOⴷLU for being with us from Istanbul. Thank you for being with us again here in the France 24 debate.